Good morning. It's a great pleasure to be here. I must admit, I always enjoy spending time in the sunshine, and I understand that today is going to be a little bit warmer than yesterday, which is fantastic. I'm also very pleased to have heard the word brand mentioned probably 50 times within the last 10 minutes, which is great. We've spent 40 years now as Interbrand trying to help companies to understand how important they are as assets and to try and help businesses to use them to the greatest effect for their profit. I think we're having a little bit of technology, so I'll just keep going and hopefully it'll catch up with me. What I want to talk about today is how brands are changing. In his opening speech, Mr. Grubel mentioned about the fact that our behavior is changing, our whole lives are shifting, apparently driven by digital technology, but I think in most markets what you find is that people adopt the things that they find useful. The guy who invented Moore's law about the speed at which technology accelerates invented another one which was called chasm theory. And what he mentioned in that was that there are many technologies which are launched into the world, but the only ones which become adopted are the ones that we actually find useful. And the reason we find so many of these things that we now have in our pockets, on our desktops, in our cars and everywhere else is because they allow us to communicate better, they allow us to find information, they allow us to share with our friends, to keep in contact. These are the things that really make them important. And they are changing our behavior every single day. And we'll come back to that in a moment because I think we now have some slides. Many of you may be aware of Interbrand. Every year we produce a list of the world's most valuable brands. We've been doing this for 14 years now. And we actually invented the process of brand valuation around about 25 years ago. At its heart, it's very simple, like most things are. You need to understand where a company earns across all of its different geographies, its different markets, its different products. And then to try and determine the proportion of that earnings which are due to the brand. This applies as much to the way that you might think about a property at La Zagaleta, or indeed the desire for somebody to come and live or visit Marbella. That's what we call the role of the brand. How important is it in choice? So I can tell you, because we've been doing this for years, that the proportion of the brand in your choice of gas or petrol, whichever word you may use, or maybe essence, or whatever the correct term is here in Spain, to put into your car, is around about 10 to 15%. It's not exactly one of the most important decisions we make in our lives. And there's a number of different vendors that we'll happily use. If you were buying a Ferrari, or a Bentley, I should probably say, given current company, to put that petrol into, thank you, sir, little tag team going, yeah? Then obviously a significant proportion of that choice, something in the region of 70 to 75%, despite the fact that we'll do a very good job of rationalizing that it was extremely well engineered and you know, fantastically built. There's a much bigger thing going on there, which is about what we say about ourselves and how we want others to perceive us. The third thing that we then look at is effectively a measure of loyalty. Quite simply, how likely are you to come back as a purchaser? And we call it brand strength. We look on the inside of the company to make sure that the company understands what's going on around the brand, what it stands for, how it should influence everything from products and services to communication to environments, and more importantly nowadays, culture. The internal culture of businesses are as much their brand as anything else. And I'm sure many of you who have businesses, run businesses, or associated with businesses know that talent is the toughest thing to come by. Increasingly, millennials or Gen Y, if you want to call them that, people who were basically born after around about 1980, want companies that have something powerful about them. A strong brand, a clear purpose, preferably a very keen eye on being a good corporate citizen as well. And all of these things come together to help decide whether or not you have a strong brand or not. We look on the outside and the inside. We put those three things together and it generates a value. And the most important thing nowadays that we work with off the back of this is not necessarily the number itself, but of course if you understand all of those different things, how and where you make money, how important the brand is in that, and how strong it is against its competitors, that gives you a very, very powerful strategic framework to build your business. So you could say that that's where branding is right now. I also want to just give you a glimpse inside Interbrand for a second, and then maybe we can go on a little journey, a little story of the evolution of branding over the last maybe 20, 30, or even as long as 150 years ago.
To join Interbrand is not to join an agency, but to join a cause. You know, we're here to make the world a better place.
It really makes a difference when you love the people you work with.
People are really down to earth, don't take themselves too seriously, but incredibly talented. I find it really inspiring to work with them, full of energy, full of ideas, incredibly ambitious.
We take the work more seriously than we take ourselves.
So for Microsoft recently, we dug a hole in the world for rugby fans. We created a completely new look and feel to Munich Airport just over the last few months. In Paris, we're helping sell lingerie online. For Royal Brunei, we created a spa in the sky.
We don't just change brands, we change an entire company, entire categories of business.
Many of you, I'm sure, in the room are aware of the work that we've just been doing with Iberia, of which we're extremely proud, and also the work that we do with Repsol. And I have to say, I actually want one of these chairs. I think they're beautiful.
It's never boring, it's never monotonous. Everything that we do has vast consequences, so I don't take anything that I do lightly.
We're creating the equivalent of Zappos in Brazil for sporting shoes. And for Opera Australia, we've used digital technology to make opera popular amongst younger people. Created some fantastic packaging for Bacardi in China. And you get to do things that you thought you'd never have a chance to do in your career. In New Zealand, we've rebranded Sky. And in Australia, we created the world's first inflatable identity for Darling Harbour in Sydney. It doesn't matter where you are or what you're working on. As one firm, we have common tools, common approaches, and a common desire to create brands that change the world. So that gives you a bit of a view inside us. You have to be creative and you have to be logical to be good at building brands. And we would say that where we are now in the world is in a place where brands really have to strive to create meaningful value in this post-digital world that we live in. And of course, we hear many stories about companies struggling to monetize their offers within the marketplace nowadays. But let's take a little look at the history of branding. The first stage we'd call, which was pretty much when I joined the company, so things are moving fast. I joined Interbrand 16 years ago, and we would say at that point that we were in the age of identity. It was all about really making sure that people were aware of your trademark, they knew where you were and what you stood for, literally stamping your name on something. I think in Swedish, the word for fire is brand. At that time, a time of increased choice where many different products were available, brands are used quite simply to make sure that they stand out and consumers can actually find them. They are a shortcut to choices. They enable us to immediately know what that product or service is going to offer us. And people talked about logos. If I'd asked a group of people 15 years ago what a brand was, the vast majority would have said a logo, an identifier for the business. But even in this early stage of our understanding and development of brands, we started to realize that it was much more than that. It was much more about differentiation and identification, as I was talking about earlier on when you're buying your next Bentley. At that time, the way that companies communicated was very much one-way traffic, the world of mass communications. Now, somebody said to me yesterday, we now live in a world of mass communicators, which is a very interesting way of thinking about it. So the world has changed. The primary measure in that world of mass communications and the clear desire to establish your trademark was awareness. If people knew who you were, markets were growing, the chances are your sales would grow. And there was actually very little connection between an understanding of what a brand was and how it actually influenced the business. It was kind of one of those things that everyone knew they needed one, but they didn't necessarily know how it worked. And if you looked at it within the context of an organization, this is where brands sat. Somewhere in the marketing department, perhaps called the logo police, but really nothing much to do with the business as a whole. At that time, we were in the world of what you might call creating and managing identity. And all of this presentation is based upon some recent research that we've done, where we asked people around the world what was important to them. And it was all chief marketing officers, chief executives, chief information and technology officers, trying to get their points of view on what mattered right now for business. You might find it difficult to read those words down the bottom, but this group of services, really based around the whole notion of the age of identity, included things like implementing brands, creating packaging, making sure that you were managing your assets. Pretty straightforward stuff. And then we entered the age of value. And I think we partly drove this by the creation of brand valuation some 25 odd years ago. And that got brands a seat at the table. People started to talk seriously about the effect that it had on their business. But even at that time, even if you go back to 2004 there, it still largely lived within the marketing department. And marketing directors, CMOs, whatever you want to call them, moved around pretty frequently. But there's a big change going on. If you can see, even as recently as 2012, almost doubled in the tenure, the time that chief marketing officers stayed within organizations. And what this signals is quite a significant change in their role, and indeed of the role of a brand within a business. Quite simply, brands became business assets. According to PR Week, our Best Global Brands League Table is the third most looked at league table amongst CEOs, just behind the Fortune 500 and the best companies to work for. And within this context of the world of value, we needed to have a better understanding of our customer, quite simply because we needed to have a much richer dialogue to genuinely engage with them. And if we got it right, instead of measuring things like awareness, what we were measuring was the increase in value, the return on investment for the investments that we were making, not the costs that were associated with building a brand. And this just quite simply illustrates how we worked with Samsung and the result that that had when you start to actively manage the value created by a brand. And another big shift has really been taking place probably over the last 5-10 years, certainly since I joined Interbrand. From being something that lived within the marketing department, increasingly people recognize that brands are effectively your business strategy brought to life. They affect every single part of your business, from your culture to your environments, to your products and services, to your communications. Tremendously influential business weapons. And in this stage, we would say, and it even says on the back of my business card, creating and managing brand value, this is largely about measuring and managing value. And again, when we look at the underlying research for this, you can see this kind of second wave of requirements, if you like, which is around big data analytics, measuring and valuing brands, understanding return on investment. So where are we now? We think we've approached what we would call a cars and horses moment. This is Fifth Avenue, actually, where our offices are in New York, but back in 1905, when cars and horses happily lived on the same streets and nobody questioned it, because cars and horses went at around about the same speed. In fact, horses were slightly more reliable because they definitely started every morning, and sometimes cars didn't. And they could carry a lot more. So a lot of people opted for horses in this world. The interesting thing is that by the time you get to 1910, all of the horses have gone and the world has changed. And we think this is exactly what's happening in the world of business and brands right now. Brands like Google and Facebook and Apple were mentioned earlier on. But this is just skimming the very, very surface of it. There is a fundamental shift going on in terms of what consumers want from brands. And if businesses aren't well positioned to be able to deliver it and well organized to be able to deliver it, they will very quickly become horses and disappear from the streets. We have approached, entered, and are very much living through what you might call the age of experience, where we expect everything to be beautifully joined together like Apple is, where the store experience seems to somehow echo the way it feels to actually use one of their machines, and the way that their products interact and connect together echoes the way that their staff seem to beautifully integrate within the store. Very, very powerful, very, very difficult to do. And the shift in power means that this has to accelerate within businesses. It's not long ago when, as consumers, we felt this big compared to the size of an organization. Now, any individual in the world can hold a company to account in a nanosecond. All you need to do is tweet about it. A guy flying from London to Chicago last year lost his luggage, and he got in touch with British Airways via Twitter. And the response that he got from BA was an automated response which said, "Our Twitter feed is available between the hours of 9 and 6, Greenwich Mean Time." This guy was in Chicago. We live in a 24-hour society. Within half a day, that guy was on CNN because that tweet had gone viral. British Airways didn't respond for 4 days. And the only thing he ever did get from them was this rather automated response. That's not good enough nowadays. We expect better. And we can move very quickly from one offer to another. So this shift that's going on is actually symbolized within our global league table. Coca Cola, one of the finest marketers in the world, have been top of our league table for the last 14 years. This year, both Apple and Google overtook them. And I don't think that's the last of the new type of companies that will be doing that. The big question is whether or not the legacy businesses, the companies that have been around for hundreds of years, like the Coca-Colas, are going to be able to transform and keep up. Because if that's where we are now, then the transition that we're moving toward is something which looks very, very different. Genuinely with the customer in the middle, building an ecosystem of products and services around them, some of which might be created by your company, some of which might be created by partners, some of which involve joint ventures, and all of the capabilities of your organization revolving around that. Now, we'll come back to how that affects structural issues in a moment. But there seem to be around about 4 or 5 things that we should be looking here in terms of how to build a brand which is ready, not for the future really, for today. Because we're going to talk a little bit more about the future in a minute. First and foremost, purpose is becoming much more important. This is Tesla, who are trying to change the world of cars and mobility. And they don't have all the things holding them back, so they don't think about dealerships, they think about different ways of doing things. And they think very much about what they're doing and contributing to the planet. Now, again, you talk to millennial employees, this is extremely important to them. If you don't have a strong corporate citizenship capability and really live it and breathe it, not just write checks to support things, but actually change your operations, you won't be able to hire the best. And if you haven't got the best, you won't be the best. This is a great example, again, of what's changing in the world. A.G. Lafley famously threw open the doors of R&D in Procter & Gamble in the year 2000. This is something that GE, one of our clients, is doing with a company called Quirky. GE want to accelerate the way that they produce consumer electronics. So they did a partnership with Quirky and gave them the rights to all of their patents in the process. Net result, much faster time to market. Sorry. And within the context of an organization, I was mentioning it affects structure quite significantly. Most companies are still organized like the diagram on the left. most legacy companies. They're pyramidical with a CEO at the top, a great big, as one of my friends call it, permafrost layer of middle management in the middle, which prevents you from almost doing anything, and messages go up and down through the organization very, very slowly. That's fine when markets don't move fast, but markets are moving faster and faster every single day. Companies need to rewire themselves to be able to give people the ability to work across all of the different capabilities of an organization and resources, to create product and services offers geared towards specific groups of people. And increasingly, those groups of people are getting smaller and smaller and smaller. But we'll come back to that in a minute. So you end up with an organization which has to be much flatter, much greater degrees of delegation, much greater degrees of accountability, responsibility, and the ability to actually do stuff to keep up with the market. If you want to accelerate beyond it, you have to really look at the way that some of these companies like Google and Apple organize themselves. In terms of the experiences themselves, people are increasingly expecting experiences to be geared around where they are, what's going on, and what they need right at that very moment. Contextual experiences, if you like. This requires the very careful pulling together of the real world with the virtual world, so that you can understand what people are doing, when they're doing it, and what they might be likely to do next. We want brands to be able to anticipate our needs as much as deliver against our wants. Everyone talks about big data. One of my CMO clients in the US calls it big headache, because it's very difficult to actually get proper insight out of it. But I think people are going wrong when they keep talking about insights. What we need to do is rehumanize data, recognize that this is about people, and use it to build a much richer understanding of who those individuals are and what they might want from us. That then becomes far more powerful, not just for marketing terms, but in terms of business. What do you deliver? What people might want? And of course, the way that we measure things is infinitely more complicated than it ever was, or infinitely richer, whichever way you want to look at it. There are now data sets running around not just the brand and what people think of this, but increasingly around the individuals, the customers that we have. And that ability to aggregate and understand and pull genuine understanding about individuals from that data will be what separates the cars from the horses. So we've now entered a world where we are integrating seamless experiences. And again, looking back at the data, you can see things like product and service innovation, the desire to optimize go-to-market strategies, creating engagement from employees, and optimizing experiences and touch points are the things that are really keeping CEOs, chief marketing officers, chief technology officers awake at night. But where next? Well, I first started working in the world of digital, if you want to call it that, back in the dot-com days in 1998. I got involved in a very successful dot-com in the UK, which has gone on to float and been very successful, and worked with a whole raft of different companies in my capacity as a leader within Interbrand. And at that time, people started to scratch their chins and talk about the possibility of what they called personalization. Well, here we are 14 years on, and we have incredibly fast data speeds and the opportunity to do things that we never could have dreamed of. But there's something else going on, because we are entering the age of you. Effectively, the creation of 7 billion brands. And you might think I'm mad, but I'm going to go on and explain why. People are increasingly thinking about themselves in this way. So the future is actually brands doing business with brands. Coca Cola kind of started doing this a couple of years ago with the bottle, and I don't know whether but the success of this was phenomenal. And they're just running version 2 of it right now. People want stuff that they feel is theirs, that they share values with, that they have a passion for, which has a sense of, shall we say, good citizenship within the world, and which somehow says something about who they are. It's what brands are all about. I was talking to one of my clients at Adobe 2 weeks ago at their summit in London, and he works within some of the sort of visualization areas, so he runs products for them like Photoshop. And the number of, if you want to call them kids, you can, but let's call them millennials, who actually change photographs before they ever get onto Facebook is remarkable. Something in the region of 70% of all photographs are retouched, changed color, either using some of the very, very simple tools that things like iPhone provide, or by people literally going and retouching. People are managing their visual appearance online. Whenever we recruit people, we are more likely to spend time looking at LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter than we are your CV. We want to know what kind of person you are. And on the other side of the coin, you have to actively manage what kind of person you are. You have to have a brand of your own. And when you're building a brand, you think very carefully about the brands you want to connect with that. So it's going to be harder and harder to get people's interest, to trigger their desire, and get them to want to actually be a part of your brand. The age of predictive intelligence is upon us. This takes us another step forward in terms of contextual experiences. And consumers are going to expect companies to be able to predict and understand and provide products and services and experiences when it's relevant. And within the context of how your business needs to operate, I'm sure many of you have heard this statement before, it's a Silicon Valley thing. You'll always be in beta. There is no case of we'll do the brand now and then we'll come back to it in a couple of years. It's constantly evolving and growing every single day because your brand is your business brought to life. And if you start to put all of some of these things together, you get to where Disney have just gone, an experiment they're doing out in Florida, where they're creating smart tools which enable people to go in and out of the hotels. It will tell them what's going on, where they might be able to meet Mickey, and particularly geared towards creating much more magical contextual moments for their customers. So we think we're now in the age of making business personal, which is a very, very different way of thinking about what we do as brand builders and what brand owners need to do in terms of thinking about how to build their business. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.